This is a Loom video about Sonnet 43 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. This poem was first published in 1850, so some time ago, very much at the peak of the Victorian era. Now, as you can see from these photographs, typically Victorian families were very straight-laced, especially middle-class families like Elizabeth Barrett Browning's. They had a certain amount of money, and the main way that they could distinguish themselves from what they saw as the lower inferior classes was by having very strict moral codes, ways in which people were expected to behave, to dress, to conduct themselves in public, to speak or not to speak, depending on your social status. So manners, politeness, rules, all of these things are very, very important to the Victorian middle classes. So you can imagine what happens when Elizabeth Barrett, as she was at the time, fell in love with a poet and writer called Robert Browning. Now, they saw one another in secret and they married, knowing that Elizabeth Barrett's father did not approve of the marriage. And as a consequence, her father would disown her, so declare that she was no longer his daughter, and disinherit her, so that when he died, none of the money from the estate would be passed on to her. So she would effectively be penniless. Um, but they ran away together to Italy. They lived in Florence, very romantic setting, and they lived together for love, which to her as a romantic poet was the most important force in the universe. Now, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, as she became, wrote quite a lot of poems. This is probably her most famous, Sonnet 43. Now, she absolutely loved Robert Browning from every aspect of her, every particle of her being, everything to do with her soul and who she is just filled with love for Robert Browning. Her heart bursts with love and pride when she thinks of him. She is someone that she has given up everything for. Um, she's she doesn't feel that she's done anything wrong. Her family have said no to her marrying this man, but she's married him anyway. So when she says things like, this is from the poem here, I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. She's expressing this romantic love that to her is absolutely total. Now, if you've ever loved somebody to this extent, then you're a very lucky person. For many people, they never meet somebody who perfect as Robert Browning was for Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Now, what becomes obvious is that this poem is written. It does feel like it's very much from Elizabeth Barrett Browning to Robert Browning. It could be written for any person, somebody else, and lots of people have used this poem to describe love for somebody else. But she uses a sonnet, which is a poetic form. It's a type of poem lots of writers use. Shakespeare was a big proponent of writing sonnets. So let's have a closer look at what exactly a sonnet is. Now, sonnets were popularized by a man called Petrarch in the 14th century in Italy. He was an Italian poet, and he really sort of made the sonnet to be a very, very popular form of poetry. It did become very fashionable in Britain much later. But what it is, it's a 14-line poem. It's got a very specific rhyme scheme, which we'll have a look at in a minute. And the meter, the rhythm of the poem, in this case, it's iambic pentameter. Now, you'll probably be familiar with this from your study of Shakespeare. So it's 10 beats in a line. They're alternating stressed and unstressed syllables. So, for example, it goes dee dum, dee dum, dee dum, dee dum, dee dum. I am a pirate with a wooden leg. Okay, that's an example of iambic pentameter. It doesn't need to be fancy. Anyway, this 14-line poem really forces the poet to wrap their thoughts up in this very neat little package and express their passion either in a read form or something which could be sung along to with a musical instrument. Now, English poets did start writing poems in this kind of Italian kind of style. Shakespeare wrote an awful lot of sonnets. The word sonnet comes from the word sonetto, meaning a little song. Sonnets are about love, themes related to love most often, and this is no exception. Now, when you have a look at the poem, you'll notice that it is actually in two sections. There's an 8-line octet, sometimes called an octave, and that is followed by a 6-line sestet. This is a 6-line section. So basically, you've got an 8-line section, a bit of a volta, and then you've got a 6-line section. Look at it in a minute. And as I've already said, iambic pentameter. Now, iambic pentameter doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be read in a very strict way. You'll notice that this is a very kind of natural sounding poem. So one of the great things that Browning's done here is that she's managed to really kind of take that iambic pentameter and make it sound really natural, make it sound honest, make it sound sort of really fresh and as if it's coming from her heart. Okay, here's the poem. Let's have a read through it. Now, you may well recognize some of these lines. It's quite famous. Sonnet 43 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet needs, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs, and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with the love I seem to lose, with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. Wow, if anyone ever wrote a poem like that for me, I'd be pretty chuffed, I can tell you. So let's have a look. One of the things that you probably notice is that this is a very kind of breathless, passionate poem. And one of the ways that it gets that passion across, of course, is this I. How do I love thee? This, like I say, is very much sounds like Elizabeth Barrett Browning actually speaking to her actual husband, Robert Browning. But one of the other things which is very obvious in our first reading of the poem as well is the rhyme scheme. Now you'll see that this is ABBA, so ways and grace, the A spelling days and praise. And then we've got height, sight, candlelight, and right. One of the reasons why English poets did tend to sort of change this rhyme scheme, Shakespeare didn't really use this rhyme scheme at all, is because in English, which is a much more varied language when it comes to endings than Italian, it's a lot easier to find multiple words. So you need to find 4 words that rhyme with ways, 4 words that rhyme with height, and then you've got 3 words that rhyme with use, and 3 words that rhyme with faith. So you'll notice that the faith, breath, and death, it's a little bit dodgy down there, the rhyme scheme. But she's trying to be true to this like Italian structure of the. Very often English poets would mix up a little bit, but Browning's done a very traditional sort of take. One of the most obvious techniques that you'll see is this: I love thee, 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 I love thee. She loves him. Oh, I missed one as well. There's another one in that third line from the end. But this is anaphora. It shows the strength of her feelings for her husband, this repetition, love thee. So let's have a look in a bit more detail at this first octet, the way that it's structured, some of the language techniques that Elizabeth Barrett Browning is using here. Now you'll notice that it starts off here with, how do I love thee? Okay, so that first question, which opens the poem, how do I love thee? But it is actually answered. Now, this is a technique known as hypophora. And a lot of people say that a rhetorical question is a question that doesn't need an answer. That's not strictly true, because rhetorical questions are answered. A rhetorical question is more a question which is used rather than to get information, like what's your name, how old are you, that sort of thing. It would be a question that you might ask to make a point. What on earth do you think you're doing? You're not actually looking for an answer. You're just trying to sort of make a point by asking a question. And she's doing that here. How do I love thee? She answers, let me count the ways. So you got that hypophora. It makes it feel a bit more she sounds much more certain, much more definite. Now you notice that she doesn't say, "How do I love you? I love you, I love you, I love you." She says, "How do I love thee?" Now I have to say, even in 1850s England, in the Victorian era, they didn't really use this word. This is a very old-fashioned choice of pronoun, and it's what's called an archaism. It makes it sound like it comes from a bygone age, type of, perhaps a time where knights rode around on horseback, and it makes it seem much more kind of classical, much more eternal, much more old-fashioned. And you'll see that that's repeated throughout the poem. It almost makes it sound a little bit like biblical. So if you read the King James version of the Bible, which was came out in the 1600s, there's still a lot of thee and thou and thine. Thine is the power and the glory, which the writers chose to use to give it this kind of eternal sort of sense. Even in the 1600s, it wasn't used as widely as you might imagine. But back to the 19th century. This is very old fashioned. Um, so let's have a look at this first one. She says, "Let me count the ways." And then you get this whole list of ways in which she loves Robert Browning. "I love thee to the depth and breadth and height." Now, if you think about a three-dimensional object like this box, it has depth, it has depth, it has breadth, and it has height. Okay, so what we're talking about here is we're talking about the normal dimensions of the world, of material things. Okay, um, so her love here is total. It's like, sort of the up and the down, the right and the left, and the back and the front as well, which she really does love her husband to the totality of all these dimensions. But you notice that there's no punctuation at the end of here. It's an enjambment. It goes straight onto the next line. This really shows that her passion is overflowing here to the depth, breadth, and height my soul can reach. Okay, so we've moved here. So we've got depth and breadth and height, which are earthly dimensions, but my soul, we're moving into the spiritual sort of realm. So as well as having this material, earthly love for him, her love is more kind of eternal. It's more sort of uh, to do with heaven and earth. And you'll notice as well that there are a few words that are here, this semantic field of sort of good and spiritual, being, grace, right, praise. You'll notice that they're capitalized as well. So they're obviously being used in a very significant kind of way here. These are all things to do with God. Grace is God's kind of forgiveness and, sort of mercy for, I mean, out like that if he doesn't. So that's what's called God's grace. Slightly more complicated than that. But these are all, you can see that she's very much explaining her love in these religious contexts. So moving on, we have this other image of totality down here by sun and candlelight. Obviously, the sun illuminates the day, candlelight illuminates the night. This image of day and night basically means all. So I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. So again, this image of totality. And this last bit here, we've got these two anaphras. I love thee freely and I love thee purely. Now let's look at those adverbs. You can tell they're adverbs, of course, because they end with ly. I love thee freely suggests she was never free. Her love has set her free. And I love thee purely. Now, she sees this as being a thing which is right. It's something that she was completely willing to abandon her family and leave her family behind. Because as far as she can see, that love that she's experienced, that feeling that she has for him, is so pure, so intense, and so overwhelming that it has to be good, it has to be right, because it's everything that she feels. So yes, kind of, I guess you could argue that she's justifying her love to a certain extent. Now, if we have a look at the sestet, There's a kind of a slight volta here. It changes slightly, but it still continues with this sort of list of ways in which she loves him. You'll notice as well that we've still got these archaisms, these, which run throughout the poem. She's still writing in first person, but we've got more of these kind of religious images here. My childhood faith. You know, when you're a kid, you believe in stuff. You believe in Father Christmas and the Easter Bunny. Grown-ups tell you stuff. And you go, okay, yeah, all right, sounds reasonable. That explains why my presence here. In Victorian era, it's a bit more religious. So, you know, the faith of children was seen as something which was absolutely pure and absolutely overwhelming, unquestioning. And she's saying that, you know, her kind of innocent childhood dream, you know, she's kind of had this image of what it would be like to fall in love, to meet the man of her dreams, and she's got it. You know, she's a very, very lucky young lady in this respect. So this is kind of a bold statement. Again, we've got these kind of juxtapositions here. We've got smiles which represent happiness. We've got tears which represent sadness. So smiles and tears, again, that's like an image of everything. You could argue that there's a little bit of a kind of an allusion, a reference to the marriage vows. So when people get married, they promise to love each other, not just in the good times, but in the bad times as well. And it strikes me that that is kind of what she's promising here. This is almost like a sort of a declaration of her love. No matter how what life throws at you, you're still going to love this person. Your love is important, more important than anything else. All encompassing. And here again, we've got this idea of if God choose. So it's very much in the hands of God. I shall but love thee better after death. Now, again, this shows how eternal her love is. God is supporting them. This is a romance. This is a love that is on the side of the gods. This is something which is pure. This is something which is right. Okay, and her family are wrong. So I hope you can see then that that is a pretty straightforward poem after it seems perhaps a little bit kind of odd when you first read it. So if there are 5 things to remember, these are the things that I'd like you to remember about this poem. First of all, the form. It's a traditional Petrarchan sonnet. The enjambment that caesura in the lines, they make the poem seem more passionate and they make it seem more natural. The enjambment particularly makes it sound like it's a real person speaking their real thoughts rather than, you know, some dissociated poet somewhere writing something. It doesn't matter. This feels like a real person burdening their soul, declaring their love. The structure, it starts with the question. The first half of that line goes on to answer the question, just listing the ways in which she loves him. There's a lot of hyperbole, exaggeration, and these juxtapositions as well, which really show the strength of her feeling. The juxtapositions and the contrast show the totality of her love. She loves him all day, all of the night, all of the time, all, you know, everything is about him. I'm sure you can popular music songs where the lyrics reflect that same sentiment. The religious language here is really sort of saying that my love is like a religion. It's all-consuming faith. It's a way of life. It's my choosing. It's my calling. This is what I'm. This is what I've chosen. I've chosen to dedicate myself, my love for my husband, in the same way that I might dedicate myself to a religion. And finally, we've got the repetition and anaphora. These repeated phrases throughout the poem really kind of drive home the intensity and strength that she feels. Okay, well, that's hopefully given you a good way into this poem. It's by no means meant to be an exclusive list. I'm sure that there are other places where you can find information. You may well have noticed some ideas yourself, which you know, you're welcome to add into any sort of comments below, and hopefully your teacher will be able to answer them for you if you can't find the answer yourself. All right, good luck, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the poem. Bye bye.